Dear Academy, dear guests, it's my pleasure to talk here today in the anniversary event of the Estonian Academy of Sciences. And I guess that my task was to talk about some Estonian experience about how to use scientific advisors in bringing science to policy making. So as was said, I'm coming from Estonian Ministry of Social Affairs, and I'm a scientific advisor for health policy. So first to start, for sure, scientists and policymakers have to work together. So as was stressed in the second talk today, scientists have to provide evidence for policymaking, but policymakers have to say the evidence requirements, so what they actually need. And they have to provide by that also resources for research. But for sure, there are questions from both sides. So policymakers may ask, so how these scientific results can be contextualized, what they actually mean. So was the research actually useful? Whereas the scientists usually can think, so how much their research was actually used? Was it interpreted correctly? And for sure they can say or sometimes think they don't have enough sources. And a little more about this discrepancy or the divide between these two communities. So policymakers are for sure dependent on the social context. So they couldn't make any decisions without the immediate needs of the society. Otherwise, it would seem pretty irrelevant. Whereas the scientist usually even tries to remove himself from the social context, to be independent in his or her research. And the scientist for sure wants to go to more general or universal problems and carry out cutting-edge research, and usually or sometimes going even really into the details. So bringing these two together requires trust, respect, and transparency. And as has been suggested, also facilitated dialogue and maybe translational scientists. I found I thought a nice paper already published a couple of years ago that actually discussed about the facilitators and barriers that policymakers had when they used or didn't use research in their decision-making process. So the facilitators, number one, was personal contact between the scientist and the policymaker. The timeliness and relevance of the research, or the research maker, and the research that included a summary with a clear recommendation. As was also already mentioned today, the message has to be clear and concise. And the barriers were, of course, the opposite. So the absence of contact, lack of timeliness and relevance. So research has to be relevant and targeted and well communicated. So now Estonian experience, or some Estonian experience that I can talk to. So in addition to different advisory boards that Estonia has to advise the Prime Minister and the committees that the Estonian Academy of Sciences has, in 2016, Estonian Research Council started to support the positions of scientific advisors in various ministries. At the moment, we have 12 advisors in these different ministries, in the 10 different ministries. And just about the profile of these scientific advisors. So 65% hold a PhD degree, and their research experience usually varies between 10 and 20 years. This is a picture that I think doesn't have all the scientific advisors, but you can see that we are a pretty young community, but quite experienced. And you can also see that as the program was started 2016, we only have 2 years of experience. So what I'm telling now is really from these 2 years, the cross-cut or general reflections from these 2 years. So what are the main official tasks of the scientific advisors? I apologize for the little bit small text, but I'm just telling these, the text as well so you can hear. Every ministry has for sure its specifics, but the general tasks set by the Estonian Research Council are advising the ministry in research and development related issues, planning and organizing international and national R&D activities, and also realization of these activities within sectoral development plans. So actually bring the R&D activities into the real world, so to do it actually. And representation of Estonia in international R&D activities too. Now, I actually did a little survey among our scientific advisors, and I got the feedback that in many ministries, the scientific advisor, the task of the scientific advisor is also find finances for our R&D activities. And why is because the R&D activities probably in the ministries don't have a really long history. So if you bring something new in, you are expected to bring in resources too, to carry out these activities. Now about the expectations of these scientific advisors. So before each of us started, we started with certain vision. So what we wanted to be, an independent mediator between science and policy, to increase the knowledge on sectoral R&D activities in ministries, so to actually tell about the science that is made in this area to the ministries, to increase the dialogue between scientists and officials and policymakers, and also increase the share of science-based decisions and policymaking, and tidy up the basis of this science-based policymaking. So this was kind of our vision. Now, what has been turned into the reality? So as I said, the positions of scientific advisors have been in place only for 2 years. So the comments that I got from my fellow scientific advisors was that this is kind of too short period to make any really broad conclusions yet. But I marked here with a little grayish text, which the things that actually lead us to a real R&D activities to carry out or to develop these R&D activities in the ministries. So most of the advisors have actually got a really good understanding on how the ministries organize their research and development activities. They have managed to coordinate the R&D activities a little bit better in the ministries. And many of us have been involved in drafting development plans and strategies in the ministries. And many people are also, or most of us are also involved in coordinating the interaction between the ministry in international initiatives, usually, for instance, European Union partnerships. And then I also asked how the voice of the scientific advisor is being heard in the ministry. So the more green it is, the better, the more red, the worse. So 20% say that yes, they feel that their voice is being heard, 40% that yes, usually, and then 20% say that quite rarely. But I think it's a still pretty positive image, and a really positive comment was that scientific advisors have formed sort of scientific network between the ministries. So we can turn to someone in a different ministry when we need a kind of contact networking. But something that was also stressed was here in the low right is that there's too much effort going to involvement of scientific advisors in day-to-day politics-related issues and reporting and administrative tasks. So these are those small things that maybe lead us, so why we get lost in the small things and maybe don't see the big vision, so to increase the potential of ministries to carry out R&D activities. Now the challenges that were mentioned. So the advisors was a little bit worried about finding their place in already well-developed structure of ministries. So for sure the structure of ministries has been there for tens of years, while we have been there for only 2 years. And not only to talk about challenges, we also talked about the potential suggestions. So how to solve this issue of finding a place in the structure of ministries? So it was suggested that scientific advisor could have a separate position in the structure of a ministry to be able to gain a greater impact. So this leads us to the questions of whom we advise actually. And just to illustrate that at the moment the scientific advisors are embedded in some sort of like under structure of a ministry, so to say. So this small guy there is a scientific advisor, while we would like to have a little more broader impact probably to the ministry in general. So we also want to be involved and informed. So if we would have a little broader overview or impact into the ministry, it would also enhance our information which comes from different departments and structures of the ministry. So not to get lost in translation. So and also it's also true for our advice. Collaborate systematically with the officials and involve them in new initiatives is a little bit difficult sometimes. So the collaboration is sometimes sporadic and it really grows out from a certain need to which we react, and then the collaboration or the contact may disappear. So what to do with that? So to participate, so to build actually a network, both officials and scientists. So we would have a network of contacts that we would bring together. And to build trust among scientists and officials too. So kind of a solution. Challenge is also a combination of different logic and time frame of science and public service or policy making, and giving priority to science-based solutions instead of emotion and political pressure-based solutions. So what to do with that? So to bring really the results of scientific studies to the policymakers in a concise manner. So this would go into the relevance and presentation of scientific results. And for instance, within our ministry, we have been thinking about the kind of information days or research days where scientists in our area could talk really like generally and in an understood way to officials about their results and research. So there would be a common dialogue and the officials would understand what's actually going on and what is possible to do in our small country, Estonia. Now I also looked at the suggestions from a previous chief scientific advisor of New Zealand and looked so how these align with our suggestions. And they were mostly similar. So he suggested for a scientific advisor to report to the top, to build and maintain trust, to engage the scientific community and the policy community. And something that wasn't mentioned in our case is really the issue of independence, the independence of our advice, and to distinguish science policy from policy for science, as this is sometimes a little difficult to do. And in the end, I'd like to say that I really think that bringing science to policy makes a difference to enable faster and meaningful response to societal challenges. So again, from a paper, I found really nice examples on how this really makes a difference. So we all know that vitamin C is a preventative means against scurvy, but this fact was actually discovered more than 200 years before it was actually included in the diet of the sailors. And also the link between the lung cancer and smoking was discovered around 10 years before any legislative acts were set into place. And the question is really, how long will it take to tackle like current burning societal issues, such as obesity? And of course, science is important to giving a solid ground to any political decision, as can be seen in this sketch. And there is a sentence or a phrase in Estonian. So how do you know? I think it's a really nice initiative from Estonian Research Council that tries to ask scientific or evidence based on some claims of politicians, for instance. So there has been really interesting cases where claims of politicians have been studied on their, whether they have a solid ground or not. And with this, I'd like to thank you and answer any questions that you have. Or if there is time for questions.